Hey everyone, welcome to Infill Lot Recon. My name is Mike Marshall with WholesaleLandDepot.com. For the last decade, I've been helping investors learn how to avoid the landmines and capitalize on the opportunities that exist with vacant infill lots. If you are or have a goal of becoming an infill lot investor, you're in the right place. Today I'm going to talk about HOA and deed restrictions and how they can affect the ability to build on your property. I'm going to leave you with 4 takeaways that you can use in your due diligence process. But before I get into all of that, I really want to kind of give a disclaimer on the front end here. I really have to reiterate that these will ultimately be the concerns faced by a buyer or builder. In the grand scheme of things, most of these issues can be dealt with rather easily. Remember that they most often want you to be able to build on a property. Most subdivisions and jurisdictions, they don't want to restrict the use of the property necessarily, but you really want to be able to look into these things. The biggest tip I can give you is that you want to make sure that there is no use or no build restrictions on the lot that you're looking at. And I'll get into that a little bit more detail here. So again, I'm going to leave you with 4 takeaways, and the first one is that HOA restrictions generally limit resident behavior, and I'm going to distinguish between HOA and deed restrictions here. And again, HOA restrictions, they generally limit resident behavior. Basically, when you can have your trash cans in and when you can have your trash cans out. Do you have to utilize your garage for one car at all times? Can you have a yard sale however many times a year? Those types of things that are generally limited by HOA restrictions. However, they also do tend to limit things in terms of architecture, colors and materials, maybe the size of the house. So those are things that you really want to be aware of. The other really key distinction is that HOA restrictions are applied to the neighborhood as a whole, as opposed to deed restrictions, and this is point number 3. Deed restrictions actually apply to a specific property. And so that's the main distinction. And so you can have HOA restrictions that apply to a neighborhood, but then through an individual deed restriction, you can actually control what happens on an individual lot. And so again, you just want to be aware of what you're getting into. So you want to look at if there's any restrictions on how your lot is to be used. You want it to be used for a single family house, but maybe there's some sort of restriction that that lot was supposed to be used as like a neighborhood or like a pocket park or something like that as part of the subdivision. The builder never did anything with it. They never built it out. The builder walks away. And all of a sudden you have this vacant parcel that you think that you can actually build on, and all told through a deed restriction, it shows up that it's supposed to be some sort of pocket park. Now there should be, and there is ways to deal with those kind of things, but as in everything else, you really have to weigh whether or not you want to deal with that and the time and money that it's going to take to deal with that. Or you have to be aware of what that would take so that way you can purchase the property at the right price and turn it over to your buyer builder at a good price, and that way they can actually deal with it. So that's one of the things. The other thing too is that, deed restrictions show up in the deed itself, and this is point number 4, and they may restrict the use of the property like I just said, but you want to be aware of everything that shows up in that deed, just so that way you don't get hung up on anything. There's a lot of stories, a lot of crazy things that have shown up in deeds in the past, and a lot of them are illegal. I've seen deeds in Texas, for example, where it limited the sale of the property to exclude certain ethnic groups, and as crazy as that is, obviously that's illegal nowadays, but at a certain point in time, those kind of things were included in deeds, and it was really, really common. And so when you go and you look at the deed to the property that you're looking at, and you're looking at anything, the title reports or anything like that, just look for any restrictions of how the property is to be used. Some other examples of deed restrictions that you may want to be aware of is that there are some restrictions that may say that you can't obstruct the view of a neighboring property owner, which sounds great and well, but say if on one side you have a house, and then on the other side you have a slope that runs down a hillside and it overlooks a really great view of an open preserve area or something like that. Well, you may have a restriction on your property that limits you to where you can only build at 1 story while everybody else around you can actually build at 2 stories or something like that. So you want to be aware of that, because that can affect obviously the marketability and the sale price for a builder. Then ultimately that can affect the buy price for you as well too. And these are just all things to kind of keep in mind and give color and context to your offer price and your sell price. Another example would be control over fencing materials and fencing heights. That's not going to probably affect you much, but that's something that can show up in deeds. Also, tree removal is something that can show up in deed restrictions, preventing you from removing certain tree species. And, that could be a problem if, your lot has a couple of those tree species sitting on it, but the deed actually restricts the removal of those trees. Then that's problematic. And again, there may be ways to deal with that for sure, but you'd have to determine what that is, and do you want to deal with it, and do you want to take the time to handle all of that? In the kind of business that most of us are in, we really want to be quick in and quick out. And, as they say, time kills all deals, and you just want to be aware of what you're actually getting into, because that's what a builder's going to do. A builder's going to look at this kind of thing too, and they're going to say, well, do I want to deal with that at the price that I'm buying at? And so you just want to be aware of that. Also, another thing that's in those deed restrictions is that they'll require that your building plans are actually approved by the developer or by the HOA in most examples. And so your plans that you have, not only do you have to get them approved by, the local city or county jurisdiction, you also have to get them approved by your HOA. And sometimes those standards are actually conflicting. And so you have to really manage that whole process. And again, not a big deal for you if you're going to be selling to a builder buyer. It just puts a little bit more complexity in it for your buyer. I'm not sure necessarily that would affect your price, but it's one more factor to kind of put on the list that'll actually help you determine what your offer and sell prices are. And last thing that I'll tell you is that sometimes there's actually restrictions on the number of bedrooms that are allowed as well, and so if you're restricted to a 3-bedroom house and you really want to build a 4-bedroom house, or the market is demanding a 4-bedroom house, that can kind of play into it as well. So you just want to be aware of that. So I'm going to say it again, in the grand scheme of things, most of these issues can be dealt with rather easily. A lot of times they won't even come up. Remember that they really do want you to be able to build on these vacant infill lots most times. It really is the case, but you really got to make sure what you're getting into. And the biggest tip that I can give you is that you want to make sure that there is not some sort of restriction that limits the use of the property, or limits whether or not you can build or how much you can build on the property. That's really what you're looking for. So a lot of times this will be a quick check, just a brief run through the HOA restrictions, a brief run through the deed itself. It's not something that usually will take you a lot of time, but it's something that you want to check for, because you'd hate to have this pop up on you and really cause a headache for you. So anyway, with that, that'll do it for this episode of Infill Lot Recon. Check out the next episode where we'll talk more about infill lot due diligence that will help you avoid the landmines and take advantage of the opportunities found with infill lot investing. If you have any comments or questions, or if you're interested in my consulting services, go ahead and email me at info@wholesalelanddepot.com. And as always, you can find us at YouTube or on our website at wholesalelanddepot.com. See you next time. Thanks.